Welcome back to the Prosperous Empath. Kat here. It has been a stormy and blustery couple of days here in New England. So I hope that you are staying warm and cozy wherever you are. And I'm delighted to share with you today's conversation. Have you ever had one of those moments where you're just chatting with someone about life and business, and they share a little bit more about who they are and what makes them tick? And you see and hear yourself through your friends' words. This is exactly what happened to me in today's podcast interview with Philippa Robinson. Philippa and I were actually introduced last year when we were both featured as guest speakers on the HSP Awakening Summit, co-hosted by Jen Corcoran and Josh Sperano. And I was actually really intrigued by Philippa's work because she posts lots of pictures over on LinkedIn of her cold dipping and the experience and what she gets out of it. And I've just always resonated with so much of what she shares. And it was just delightful to have someone on the podcast with so many shared similarities and values and interests, some of which I knew were true for me, and others I really discovered through my conversation with Philippa. So a little bit more about our guest today. Philippa Robinson is an HSP coach who supports HSPs, or highly sensitive people, in taking back their power, embracing their sensitive strength, and crafting the life they're here for. She and I talk so much about doing things our way as HSPs, reinventing our relationships to the beginning of the year, our relationships to winter, and how we choose to relate to goal planning and New Year's resolutions. And we talk a lot about being a high sensation seeker, which is something that I had really no idea that I was, and resonated so deeply with until diving into this conversation today with Philippa. So if you appreciate new experiences or novelties, or you find yourself intrigued by Philippa and my practice in cold plunging in the ocean or in the channel in her case, I think that you will thoroughly enjoy today's conversation. Let's jump in. Hello and welcome to the Prosperous Empath podcast, designed especially for empaths and highly sensitive entrepreneurs just like you who are committed to achieving holistic success. I'm your host, Catherine Wood, Master Certified Coach, author, mastermind leader, and founder of Unbounded Potential, a boutique coaching firm for empathic entrepreneurs. I'm on a mission to bring empathy back into the world of business. Each episode will focus on achieving more by doing less through leveraging empath-friendly leadership practices, boundaries, rituals, and systems, all the while continuing to care deeply about ourselves, others, and the world around us. If you are committed to joyful living and running a conscious business, but amassing wealth while doing so, proving that you can have both in a society that tells you you can't, then you are in the right place. Join me here each week to find out how. Be sure to subscribe and leave a review so you won't miss an episode. Plus, you'll find all the show notes and helpful resources over at unbounded-potential.com. Philippa, Happy New Year. I'm so thrilled to have you on the podcast today.
Hi, Kat. Yeah, Happy New Year to you too. And I suppose to your listeners, but they may well not be listening in January, but that's where we're at. And it's interesting to be in 2024 now.
It is, isn't it? Actually, this episode is going to air later this month, so it's super timely. And before we pressed record, we were talking, or you were sharing how you have mixed relationships with this month, which I think is very apropos, being highly sensitive and empaths, as we get to kind of reinvent our relationship to New Year's and traditions. So I would love to hear a little bit more about that. But by way of just introducing yourself, I'd love to give you an opportunity to share your pronouns with my audience, and then a little bit about who you are.
Okay. Well, my pronouns are she, her. I'm Philippa Robinson. I'm from the UK. I'm an HSP coach. So I'm an HSP and I coach HSPs. So, and my journey to that started probably about, it must be getting on for 7 years ago now, when I had something medically going on. I thought I was going to lose the sight in at least one of my eyes, if not both. And I didn't lose that sight. But what had started then that I couldn't stop was an unraveling. It felt like a breakdown at the time, but I think looking back now, it really was the start of a massive unraveling. And I was 47 at the time. So classic time for having a big, long look at life and how I'd got to where I was. And did I like that place that I was in? And funnily enough, I've had quite a few clients who've come to me age 47. So I don't know whether there's something around that. Definitely it's when the menopause is kicking in. But that led me on a journey of leaving my legal career. I'd been a lawyer for 29 years by then, in various guises, and really taking stock of what it all meant to me, what life meant to me, what I wanted my life to look at. And that's when I decided to train as a coach, because it dawned on me that that's what I'd been doing all the time without really knowing. So yeah, that's kind of what's led me to where I am now. I do a little bit of the legal stuff because actually the left side of my brain still likes that. So I have sort of feet, but a foot in each camp now. But my heart and soul is very much in the coaching, in the connection, in the talking about being an HSP, and that's in that space, and connecting with wonderful people like you, Kat.
I love the word unraveling. And oftentimes when clients use that word with me when we're on a call, I watch their hands kind of literally unravel. But as you were saying it, I was actually appreciating your glasses and curious if whether you wore these gorgeous pink glasses that you're wearing right now before you had your unraveling.
I didn't, but that was for many reasons. I've always worn slightly different glasses. So the glasses that I wore then were smaller, hexagonal, but were purple.
Amazing.
And since then, I've had lots of things going on in my eyes. I won't bore you with them, but these are really thin frames, and I would never have been able to wear them before. But when these became available to me, I was like, yep, I actually was going to have the cobalt blue ones, but I tried the pink ones on, and I thought, oh, no, those are what I want. So, yeah, that's what I wear now, these bright pink glasses.
Well, I always am mindful that these episodes, they're recorded and only fully recorded and available on audio, but I always try to point to the visual components, because I feel like the visual components of how people show up on a call are so indicative of their essence and who we really are. And your bright glasses are just so brilliant, and something I always equate with you.
Oh, well, yeah. And that's funny, because that sort of ties in with where I find myself now, calling myself the bold HSP, and maybe we'll get onto that later. But it has been embracing this colourful, bolder part of me that has really been the latest part of my journey, actually. So it's almost like these glasses are representative, as you've pointed out, of quite a few things.
I love that.
Yeah.
Well, I'd love to touch on your kind of relationship to January and New Year, because I've actually been seeing so many posts this month, and I have a client in one of my masterminds who talks about, who was sharing recently on how her New Year starts in the spring. And I really appreciate that. And I've been seeing it everywhere recently. So what does it mean to you now? What has it meant to you in the past?
Well, yeah, I think so. I've always had a really complicated relationship with the end of the year. I think, growing up, my mum hated Christmas. It was always really stressful for her. And as a result, I learned to not love it, because it was just quite terrible, really. But she was very much, by the time we got to Boxing Day or the day after, 26th, 27th, it was like, oh, thank goodness that's over. Now we can enjoy New Year and New Year's Eve. And I think as a child, they always had a party on New Year's Eve. And it was very much a celebration of sort of, maybe it was a celebration in their eyes of the end of the year, but what I took from it as a child was very much heralding in the new year. And I think for that reason, I've always looked at the new year as a new start, as a probably very much, let's leave behind what went on last year and let's just move on to the next year. And there's wrapped up in that all my feelings around endings and beginnings, but maybe we probably don't have time for everything today. But that was definitely how I saw Christmas and New Year as a child. Christmas was not to be enjoyed. January was, right, now we're in here, let's get on with it. I'm a doer. I like to do things and get on with things. I spent a lot of my late teens and 20s and probably 30s making New Year's resolutions, and to varying degrees of success, usually quite limited, not managing to stick to them, which then became a stick to beat myself with, because the very mean voice in my head then had something else to shout about. And that is the way it was for a long time. I definitely always used to say I love January. I like the new energy of the new year. My birthday's at the beginning of February, so I think that was always something to kind of, look forward to, perhaps. And it's only recently, probably in the last 7 years or so, since I had that breakdown, and I've been talking to myself so much more in a much kinder way. Mm-hmm. And my inner critic is now nowhere near as loud as it was, that I've really not set New Year's resolutions because I don't really feel the need to, mm-hmm. in a way. I've started in the last few years having a word of the year. I've had play and rest and consolidate. Funnily enough, I can't remember what last year's was. I was thinking about that this morning. I think this year's might be gentle because I still need to learn a lesson of not pushing too much. And then it was really only last year that I really started taking notice of the things that you just mentioned, Kat, of people posting about, no, I'm hibernating in January and February. You're not going to see much of me till March. And I noticed that my reaction was, oh, gosh, that's 3 months into the year. How? and to realize that was a thing, that was possible, that some people do that. And it obviously touched something in me that I quite liked. I quite like the idea of taking it a bit slower, a bit more gentle. And so this year, I'm finding, and I think just last year, I don't think I did get going quite so quickly last year. And this year, I'm finding, as I was sharing with you earlier, I'm finding a real push-pull about it. Mm. I want to hibernate, but also I want to get going. And it's, and classically, as an HSP, I need to balance my energy and work out what is right for me. So yeah, it's interesting this year.
It is interesting. Mm. I so appreciate you sharing that struggle, that push and that pull of wanting to be gentle and slow and rest, and also feeling very goal-oriented as a doer. I mean, from one doer to the other, I feel you.
Yes.
And I just appreciate that duality. Mm. And I think so much about embracing and owning being highly sensitive or being empathic is that I think that it gives us so much more permission to reinvent on our own terms. Like even what you shared about Christmas, right? Like I think for so many of us, we don't necessarily see or acknowledge how our relationship to one holiday is simply a reflection of our upbringing or our family's relationship to that holiday. And I think so much of the work of self-expression and owning our unique values is that we get to reinvent on our own terms. And I was thinking, as you were sharing, I was just thinking of my holiday, and I enrolled both sides of my family, my husband's side and my side, in doing gift exchanges this year. So rather than buying for the whole family, which I love to do, I love buying thoughtful gifts for others. I love receiving thoughtful gifts. It's certainly one of my top love languages. But I enrolled everyone in doing a gift exchange. So we just had one person. We set a budget. We got to create our wish lists. And Philippa, I kid you not, for perhaps the first year, I didn't end the holiday with any disappointment, because I was thoroughly delighted by my gifts, because I brought so much intention to how I wanted to exchange gifts this year on both sides of my family. And man, it's so nice to give yourself to reinvent, give yourself permission to reinvent on your own terms, do things your own way, in a way that feels good with your values, your inner wisdom.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And I love that that's your reflection from it. And that's what you decided to, I suppose, to try out, because you didn't know how it was going to be. But having tried it out, it's like, wow, I really like this.
Yeah.
And that's how we do anything, isn't it? I mean, our Christmases, actually, just me and my family. So I'm married and I've got 2 teenage sons. And our Christmases have been largely just the 4 of us. Occasionally 2 family members come, and I was really worried that was going to be really boring. I've got a thing about being boring, which, but and actually both my kids turned around to me this Christmas and said that Christmas is their favorite holiday. Much better than summer, much better than Easter, and it's their favorite holiday. And there was this real sense of relief in me that I mean, I might have passed other things on, I'm sure I have, but I haven't passed that on. That allows me, and has allowed me in the last few years, to actually just relax into it and enjoy it myself, and know that us 4 just being together is enough.
Yeah. I love that. Well, you used the B word, boring, which honestly, it's a word that so many of my clients come to me on wanting support around their own relationship to boring. But we chatted about boring the last time we connected, because you were just sharing how your relationship to boring kind of goes hand in hand with this part of you that is a high sensation seeker. And you're one of the very first people that has kind of explained to me what that means. And it sent off so many light bulbs for me when you started talking about it. So please enlighten us and share kind of a little bit more about your journey with boring and being a high sensation seeker.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah, I'd forgotten we had that. I remember us talking about high sensation seeking. So, yeah, I mean, if I start there, I mean, I discovered I was an HSP probably 3-4 years ago now, so only recently. And I didn't know anything about it. I mean, I've been in survival mode for so long that, I'd just been shut off to anything, really. But I did find that once I started being open to learning things, it was amazing, all these things that came, oh, okay, yeah. So I'm much more introverted than extroverted. I'm an HSP. And then I started hearing about this thing called high sensation seeking. And I was really curious. And I find, certainly for me, if I'm curious about something, that's because it's tapped into something inside that needs a little bit of, we need to investigate a little bit further. And, I would have said without knowing, high sensation seeking is people who, just sort of, I don't know, willfully and recklessly go and do wild and, fantastic, but oh my goodness, sort of things. And much as I had that streak in me in my teens and 20s, and, I've done a bungee jump and a parachute jump and dived on the Great Barrier Reef and done some like really wonderful things. As I've got older, the desire to do those things has waned. So I also thought, oh, maybe it's one of those things that maybe you are a high sensation seeker for a little while and then it sort of, tails off. But actually, no, high sensation seeking is all about desiring the new and the novel. Mm-hmm. So, experience, and that can be as simple as eating a meal that you've never had before, or trying a new cuisine. It doesn't have to be doing a bungee jump. It can be going to a new place that you've never been, a day trip, trying a new activity, meeting new people. It's just doing something that you haven't done before, or a variation of something that you've done before that just adds that novel element around it. Yes, it can be wildly fantastic, adrenaline-filled things, but it doesn't have to be that. And I have always railed against routine, which is strange because as a HSP, it would make sense that I love routine because that can keep my nervous system in check. I know what is happening. I know what is going to happen. I know where I am, all of those things. But there is this other part of me that very much doesn't want to know what's happening, wants to experience something different. And I think part of being an HSP and a high sensation seeker means that when I experience those new things, gosh, I feel them really deeply. And I just revel in it. And it can be something really simple, like taking my dog for a walk somewhere I've never taken him for a walk before, So when I learned about high sensation seeking, I was like, oh yeah, of course, this makes complete sense. And the challenge then, it's not about, it's nothing to do with being an HSP. You can have high sensation seekers who are not HSPs. But if you are both, and there are a lot of us, actually, the challenge there is, I'm sure you can imagine, is getting enough new and novel that isn't completely, blasting your nervous system too much. So it's getting the well, I would say balance, but maybe there isn't a balance. I think either you're having a bit too new and novel, or you're having a really calm nervous system, and it's sort of the seesaw between the two.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I have so many thoughts on everything you just shared, but maybe I'll start from the beginning, because the idea that you are high sensation seeking and you resist routine, that feels very familiar for me, because when I started my coaching journey as well, I also really resisted routine. And I've always loved being high sensation seeking. And I don't think I ever claimed that title until you shared it with me on our last call. And I also had someone else on the podcast who talked about being high sensation seeking. Actually, Barbara from the summit. And that was, sense. I think, the very first time I heard the term. But I have found that clearly I am a morning routine kind of queen these days. I love my multi-hour morning routine, and I'm super kind of mindful of the privilege that it is for me to have so much time for myself in the morning. But I am curious, like, do you, in your experience, are they mutually exclusive? Is being high sensation seeking, does it consistently make you dislike a morning routine? Has your relationship with a morning routine shifted over time?
Well, I think that's part of the high sensation seeking bit, that sometimes I like to have a morning routine and sometimes I don't. Mm-hmm. I think if you said to me that I must have, acknowledging all the privilege that goes with that, if you said to me I had an hour every morning to follow my morning routine, I'd go, great, that's amazing, for a little while. And then I'd go, oh gosh, do I have to do it again? So I think, and I used to think that meant I was inconsistent and couldn't stick at things. But actually, I think it's more to do with keeping it fresh. So for me, and I totally get that a lot of people will absolutely thrive on having the same routine. And I did have a morning routine for at least a year. I started off doing the artist way and doing the morning pages and then carried on. So once my kids had gone off to school, I would have a lovely cup of herbal tea. I'd light a candle. I'd journal. I'd pull an oracle card and journal around that. I loved that, loved it. And then something broke that habit, whatever it was, and I haven't really got back to it. And I don't really have that desperate urge to get back to it either. Now, when I do, I hope I will be able to find the time to follow that, because I'm pretty sure it won't be the last time that I have that routine. I find it very calming and very nurturing, but I obviously don't feel that I need that right now. That doesn't mean I don't need it. I just don't feel that I need that right now. And what I'm really leaning into is following that intuition of what do I need? What is good for me?
Yeah. I mean, you said keep it fresh, like you like to keep it fresh, which is feels very aligned.
Yeah.
So what does keeping it fresh look like for you?
Yeah, what a great question. Well, funnily enough, I'm in the middle of blitzing my house. I don't know why. I've suddenly decided I want to clean everything in my house and sort it all out and have a really good tidy and go through all the cupboards. And I'm about 2/3 of the way through that. That started on New Year's Eve. And I think that's very much about keeping it fresh in a weird way. And I like rearranging things and putting things in slightly different places. So it just looks and feels a little bit different. You're smiling. Do you recognize that?
Well, I'm smiling because your eyes are totally lit up right now.
Yeah. So I think, and that's really easy to do. So yeah, I think and I think what it is actually, the keeping fresh for me is all about energy. And for me, it has, I think moving things around and clearing things and cleaning things and sorting it out refreshes the energy. And that is really helping me these last 8-9 days as we record, just feeling that, I don't know, freshness, newness.
Yeah. I mean, I think that makes perfect sense. I think when we start New Year's, there's often kind of this part of us that wants to declutter, simplify, create more space.
For me, that very much, I think, as I see it clearing in front of me, it helps sort things in my head. It's very much the external representing what's going on in the internal. I think I don't give it too much consideration because I just know that's what I want to do. So that's what feels right. So I just do it.
I mean, that reminds me of something that Bonnie Kasamasama shared on a prior episode that we recorded about intuition. And she says that one of the primary ways to access your intuition is to create more space in order to connect with your own inner voice. And I have it that creating space, there's so many different elements of that. There's physical space, mental space, space in our calendars, emotional space. There's so many different elements. So I think that completely makes sense.
Yeah.
I want to talk a little more about being a high sensation seeker because it still feels so novel for me to try that on for size as a label for myself. And I'm curious, like, what do you get from seeking high sensation activities? Like, what's the benefit?
For me, it's all about honoring another part of me. It's knowing that definitely resonates with me, that I like the new, I like the novel, I like to keep it fresh. That really works for me. It keeps me interested. It keeps me on my toes, I suppose, a little bit. But what it really is very similar to the HSP part of me. It's honoring that part of me. It's a deep honoring of who I am. So hearing it really trying to understand it as best I can, and then giving that part of me some of what it needs as much as I can with what I have available at the time. And, I think that's really what it is. Because without that, without the new, the novel, the freshness, I really stagnate.
Mm-hmm.
And then I get grumpy, and then I'm not that nice to be around, and I'm not a good mum. I'm not a good person to be around, or I'm not the best version of me that I can be for myself primarily, but also for others.
Mm-hmm. And do you sense that it kind of fills your cup, or is it like it fills your curiosity or your joy?
I think the self-care filling. So I always think of self-care when it comes to filling my cup. You might see it slightly differently, but I think the filling of the high sensation seeking cup requires different things to the filling of the HSP needs cup. Mm. So I suppose for me, it's about keeping both of those cups as full as I can, not both of them brimming over, but well, why not have both of them brimming over? But then it becomes a time and a money and all sorts of other. What can I actually do for myself? There is a cup, a metaphorical cup, high sensation seeking cup, and already I've got 3 weekends booked this year in February and March with friends to go and do different friends to go and do things. And that is like, oh, great, I've got these things booked. And the HSP side of me is okay, but no more. That's enough for January. That's enough for February and March. I've got nothing planned in January, so make sure I rest. Two weekends away in February and 2 weekends away in March. And to be honest, that's probably a little bit much, but it's birthdays. So, they happen when they happen, don't they? So, yeah, it's about without that new novel doing those things that light that side of me up, the rest of it sort of starts to fall apart, really. That is really important. It's not just a nice to have. Mm-hmm. It's actually really important for me to be the best version of myself.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. As you were sharing, I was thinking back on my own journey, and the doer piece comes to mind for me, because when I was first starting my business, it was so hard for me to put down that doing tendency, because I was working for the government. I was building my business on the side. So I had my 9 to 5, and then I had my 5 to 9. And I was so motivated by it. But at a point, I got to this place where I was just so burnt out because I wasn't creating any space for me. And what I'm kind of the pieces I'm putting together for myself right now are that it was that part of me that prioritized new activities and new experiences that allowed me to kind of connect with my own what's enough. And really, I think the need that got met for me was a sense of fulfillment, life fulfillment, not just career fulfillment, but life fulfillment. And the way that started for me was also not directly taken from The Artist's Way, but adapted from that book. I started taking myself out on weekly dates with myself.
Yes.
And it was such a powerful practice for me in prioritizing what I wanted to do, how I love to spend my time. It helped me break up with people pleasing, because it really forced me to reckon with that question. What do I want? What do I want to do? How do I want to spend today? And find that joy and fulfillment and contentment in spending quality time with myself.
Yeah, all those things are absolutely right. You very eloquently spoke about the things that I feel, but I did. It's funny. Yeah, I totally agree with you. And for me, I'd also add the word fun. because I felt I didn't have fun for a long time. So it's been really important for me. And, that is definitely nurturing my inner child as well and giving her some fun, because she didn't have a lot of fun when she was younger. And I did the artist way just as we were all in lockdown. So I started it in 2020. So I didn't have any artist dates because there was nowhere to go. But just the idea of doing it, that I would have done that had I been doing it at a time when I could have gone out, has been the sort of the permission slip that I needed, that I do go out and do things that I want to do now, and then go places and do things. And I just go, yeah, no, I'm going on my own. And my kids are like, can I come? I say, well, no, not today. I'm going doing this. I want to go by myself, which makes me feel a little bit like, but it's, but I know when it's really important that I go on my own. I just feel that. Yeah, it's tough, but there's that inner me inside going, no, we're just going on our own, and it's tuning into that.
Well, I'm just mindful that we've been talking about this idea of being high sensation seeking, and I'm hearing kind of the applicability in our personal lives, in our self-care, in our kind of fun meter. But I'm wondering, does it show up? Does that part of you show up in business?
Oh, yeah. And actually, just before I forget to say this, on Elaine Aron's website, which is where a lot of people go to do the HSP test, she has an HSS, high sensation seeking test, on there. And I score very highly on the HSP test. I score even higher on the HSS test.
I bet I will too.
Yeah, exactly. So if anybody's interested and wants to know, there is a test on her website.
We will link to that in the show notes.
Yeah. So does it show up? It absolutely does. And I mentioned earlier that sometimes I had a tendency to think, well, maybe I'm a bit inconsistent and don't stick at things. And what can happen is that I'm not so guilty, I think, as some people call it, chasing the shiny. Oh, that's another shiny thing. I'm very good at finishing something if I start it. That's just who I am. If I started it, I am probably going to finish it. What I don't do is start it until I do a lot of thinking, a lot of considering, a lot of gathering mental information, really. Even if it looks like I've got nothing to show you, I've got nothing on a piece of paper, I can't show you that I'm actually really doing something, but it's all going on inside. And then when I'm ready, it just all comes out. And it looks like I've done it really quickly. And I haven't, because there's been a lot of preparation going into that. And I think the high sensation seeking part of me wants to do what is fun, wants to do what is new, what is novel. It's which in a lot of ways is good, because I think it's the high sensation seeking part of me that pushes me to do new things. It's like, go on. What's the worst that can happen? Go on, give it a go. And so I think it's that part of me that makes me brave.
Beautiful.
And I think it's probably that part of me that makes me bold. Well, because a lot of being bold is being courageous or brave, which I think a lot of us use those words interchangeably. So it definitely does show up in business. And, I have two sides to my business. I have my coaching and I have my legal stuff, and that's very chop and change, and it gives me two chances to have new and novel.
Yeah.
So it kind of, when I start looking at it, it shows up everywhere.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. I mean, I appreciate that reminder that sometimes being high sensation seeking means that you have multiple sources of income, that you don't put all of your eggs in one basket.
Yeah.
Huh. Interesting.
I love watching you. You're sort of processing as we're talking, aren't you? And it's like, oh yeah, light bulb.
Yeah. I mean, I'm thinking about for me, and I think that being high sensation seeking shows up in as minuscule of a thing as a conversation with a new person.
Absolutely.
Wanting to uncover new information, wanting to hear new stories, wanting to ask new questions, wanting to invite folks to take on new practices, to bring more excitement to what we're up to how you're expressing yourself, to how you're integrating. And for me too. And I also noticed the inverse, that when I am kind of tired or my energy is down in a conversation, that's often not only a place to look with the person I'm speaking with to see if it's the same experience over there, but also just a reminder that that there's something to turn back on, that there's some energy to turn back on here.
Yeah, and so why haven't you got that energy? So what do you need to give yourself to get you back into that place you can be, if that's where you want to be? Yeah, I mean, new conversations, absolutely. When I was, I remember at one job I had this reputation for being the person, and I didn't realize this for a long time, who would always go and say hello to the new people and would go, "Hi, so what's your story then?" And that's what I'd go and do. And when, quite a few people became friends, and one of them said to me, "That was so funny when you came and said that to me on day one." I was like, "Oh yeah, it's a bit in your face, isn't it?" And she said, "No, actually," she said, "it was really nice having somebody who was obviously interested." So yeah.
Totally. I mean, one more thing I'll share too is I was thinking I used to have a second business hosting transformational retreats. And one of the roles I played as a retreat facilitator was the risk taker. I was always taking risks. I was always inviting people to bungee jump with me, to jump off of this cliff, to go streaking, to, I don't know, go swimming at midnight. Like I love that stuff. And honestly, I think it's why I never was curious about drugs. I've never drank that much, because I always kind of got that excitement need met through more kind of adventure-based practices. Like I've always been like that since I was a little girl. I've always loved taking risks and, like kind of like, I always call it like healthy risk taking, you know?
Yeah. And as you're saying that, you've made me think now that actually was me. I've never really been interested in drugs. My mum was an alcoholic, and I always used to think that is what put me off drink, but maybe actually there is a bit of, I didn't really need it, because I kind of got that woohoo from somewhere else.
Yeah. What are some of your favorite high sensation seeking activities or practices or kind of habits?
Well, one of my favorite ones.
It wasn't a leading question, but I certainly want to talk about this.
Yeah. So one of my newer favorite high sensation seeking activities is cold water swimming, cold water dipping, because you can't really swim when it gets really cold. And I started that 18 months ago. I started in the summer because it was so hot that a friend and I went, "Oh, should we just go to this place we both knew of? It's about half an hour's drive away." And we went, and it was like, "Oh gosh, this is wonderful." Like, of course, there were lots of people there. It was packed. It's a marine lake. So on the coast, it tops up when the tide comes in. So you're not actually in the sea, and it's actually the Bristol Channel. It is part of the sea, but it's the channel that's coming up to meet the river. It's where the river sort of meets the sea. And it does top up with salt water when the tide is high enough to come over the wall. But it's actually, well, unless it's windy, it's actually quite calm in there, which is quite nice. And we'd go and swim in there for like 30, 40 minutes in the summer. And we just kept going. We loved it. And we just kept going. And we did all winter 22, 23. And we've done all 20, all of last year. And we're now in our second winter. But interestingly, I'm finding this winter harder than last winter. And I think that's because it's not quite so novel and new.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That is so interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. I have been quite a lot over the Christmas break, actually, rather than it being routinely a Wednesday, twice a week on the same days. We were going all over the place because we both had time off work. And I think that's renewed my enthusiasm for it. Because if we woke up and just went, "Yeah, let's go," we just went. But the cold water is so amazing. It's the first winter, no, the first summer we did, we couldn't believe people around in the community. It's a great community down where we go. We're saying, oh, can't wait for the cold water to come back. And we're like, what are you talking about? This is wonderful, as we're paddling around. And then as the cold came and we got that buzz that you get after you've been in the really cold water, we were like, oh yeah, right, we get it now. So for the high sensation seeker part of me loves the after buzz, loves the challenge. Because as it's getting colder, it's pretty cold now. And, it's a challenge. Every time we go, it's like, oh gosh, this is going to be really cold. And the challenge of getting in and the first few breaths, the first minute or so when you're really having to control your breathing and just let your body get used to the cold. And then the euphoria of like, oh gosh, this is, I don't want to get out. And when you don't want to get out, that's the time to get out because You're starting to get too cold. And it ticks so many boxes. It ticks the high sensation seeking box. Because I go with a friend, it's the company I have with her there and back. It's usually at least around a 2-hour trip. And we talk about all sorts. There's a great community down there. The breathing makes me be in my body, which is definitely somewhere that I wasn't used to being. I dissociated for a long time because of lots of things that happened. So being in my body is really novel, actually. And it makes that happen for me without me even really having to do anything, because I've got to breathe, because it takes your breath away, doesn't it? And I was thinking today that knowing that I can do that I go and do that, and it can be hard, and constantly challenging myself to do that, to get in the water, because I know I'm going to feel amazing afterwards, really helps me be braver and bolder in other parts of my life, because I know I can do that hard thing. So it ticks so many boxes for me. It really does.
I'm resonating with so much of what you're sharing. And I think the thing I just want to share with you is that, we met through the HSP summit, but what made me know that you were my people was seeing all of your pictures of you cold water swimming. Because I think that there are some certain personality traits of people who are willing to do cold water swimming in the winter and in the ocean or the channel or lake or wherever, that just kind of makes people naturally like-minded.
I think you're right. I'd not really thought about that, but you are right. We are we're quite a bunch, aren't we?
Certainly quite a bunch. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I was thinking for me, so I haven't gone dipping yet today, but I will later this afternoon. And today will be my 76th day in a row. And I don't share that. I share and relate with so much of what you shared on the call, but I'd say one thing I don't share is the kind of consistency thing. Like, I love being consistent with my habits and routines. Like I love what it gives me. And what I find is the consistency of dipping every day allows me, and it doesn't feel, it also doesn't feel high sensation seeking anymore for me either. Like, the water doesn't feel cold. It's not hard for me to get into the water. I don't struggle being in the water. Like, that almost feels natural now, but it allows me to seek higher sensation everywhere else through the rest of the day.
Yes.
And how I prioritize and how I show up on calls and the bravery and courage I'm willing to take in business. And so it's kind of like a means to me being who I want to be everywhere else. And the fun thermometer, like, it's through the roof. Like, I just come home beaming.
Yeah, I bet you do. And you shared a post, I think yesterday or the day before, about swimming in the snow. Now, I've not swam, I've not been in the snow yet. Been in hail and like everything else, but not snow. And there is something really magic about it. And you remind me actually that one of the other things I didn't mention, that one of the real benefits for me and the reason that we kept going, my friend and I kept going, was because we did realize that after we'd been in, we were just much calmer. You know, it's really great for your nervous system. And we also had this practice. We would go there and we go, right, what do we need to leave in the lake today? So anything that was bothering us, we either literally just said, you know, didn't talk about it much and said, right, well, we're leaving that in the lake. Or we'd talk about it. We'd swim up and down and we go, right, that's it. And we talk about it and we go, right, that's it. We're leaving it in the lake. And it's literally like we were washing it off.
That's beautiful. Well, I feel like I want to share with you. So behind me, and for those who aren't watching, behind me, there's this black little box. And this is my most recent Christmas gift from my amazing gifter of a husband who bought me a portable steam sauna.
Oh,
so
wow.
Now this is going to be the newest activity to add to my morning routine is I get to go cold dipping and then I get to come home and sit in my sauna.
Wow, that's amazing.
Totally reasonably priced. Like it's nothing crazy, Philippa. Like and I tried it out yesterday. I put it together yesterday. It's a dream.
Oh, I like the sound of that. That's great. Because do you walk? Do you have to drive to where you go swimming?
I see the ocean from my office window. The beach is literally around the corner. So it is so much easier for me than your 2-hour commute. Like for me, it's a 20-minute door-to-door adventure.
Yeah. Okay. So I get that, especially as you're doing it every day. I don't think I'd want to do it every day, I think what we're highlighting here is the importance of finding what works for you in a way that works for you.
Totally. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I'm mindful of the time and I want to give you an opportunity to ask the question that I ask of all my guests, which is what has supported you in becoming a prosperous empath?
Well, I think that I feel really deep inside me that what has helped me become who I am today, and there is very much, you know, there is empathy in there, and there is a prosperity in there that I never had before, and that is very much the time and that I took to actually take stock, which you know, when I lost the sight in my eye, I could have just, I think, gone through all the medical thing, all the medical procedures, and I could have just batted away all the feelings, because that is what I'd done until the age 47, till my age 47. I'd batted all the feelings away. And I think what has allowed me to become who I am now, who I love, you know, I love that this is what has happened, is going inside and diving deep into it all. And yes, it was painful. And yes, it was hard at times, but that has allowed me to sort of leave that weight behind a little bit. If I was swimming then, I would probably have said, leave it in the lake, but I wasn't doing then. But it doesn't go away. But the weight of it has lifted, which has given me the space that we talked about earlier to discover these other parts of me. And I think it's no coincidence that it was only after therapy that I discovered my high sensitivity and my high sensation seeking. And I started my business, and that all these amazing opportunities and just the way I feel has come from all that. So yeah, doing the inner work, really.
Yeah, I'm reminded of the quote, in the very center of our fear exists our fearlessness.
Yeah, love it.
Thank you so much for today, Philippa. I've loved our conversation.
Me too. Thank you for having me, Kat. I've really enjoyed it too.
Thank you so much for listening today to this episode of the Prosperous Empath podcast with me, Catherine Wood. Make sure you subscribe and leave a review so you don't miss an episode, and so more empaths just like you and me can find the show. As a thank you, each month, one lucky reviewer will receive a 60-minute coaching session with a member of our Unbounded Potential team. You can find all the show notes and bonus resources over at unbounded-potential.com. Thank you so much for listening and locking arms with me to bring empathy and prosperity back into the world of business.